In the sleepy town of Boise, Idaho, in March 2016, 32-year-old Caitlin and her 34-year-old husband Nathan lived in an old house perched on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. The house, a weathered relic from the 1930s, stood alone at the end of a gravel lane, its gray clapboard exterior peeling under years of neglect, its roof sagging slightly from the weight of countless winters. Narrow windows framed in chipped paint let in slivers of pale light, casting long shadows across the interior where creaky wooden floors groaned with every step. The couple had moved in 2 years prior, shortly after the birth of their son Liam, who had just turned 2, his toddler years filling the house with the patter of small feet and the occasional crash of toys. Caitlin, worn thin by sleepless nights and the demands of motherhood, spent her days tending to Liam, her hands perpetually busy with bottles, diapers, and picture books, while Nathan worked long shifts at a nearby lumber mill, his clothes perpetually dusted with sawdust when he returned home. The house had come with its quirks, drafts that whistled through the walls, a furnace that rattled like a dying beast, and a faint musty smell that lingered no matter how much Caitlin aired it out. Among its furnishings was a large antique mirror, its ornate frame cracked and tarnished, hanging above the stone fireplace in the living room. The mirror, with its cloudy glass and intricate carvings, had been left by the previous owners a pilastin was with. Its cloudy glass and intricate carvings had been left by the previous owners a mirror with its cloudy glass owners a mirror with its cloudy glass and intricate carvings. Detail Caitlin had once found charming but now barely noticed amid the chaos of daily life. On one chilly morning, as the first buds of spring struggled to emerge outside, Caitlin set Liam in his high chair near the kitchen doorway, a bowl of oatmeal cooling in front of him. She moved between the stove and the sink, her slippers scuffing against the linoleum, her mind half lost in the monotony of the day, when she caught Liam's small hand pointing toward the living room, his chubby fingers stretching toward the mirror. She glanced over her shoulder, her brow furrowing as she followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual, just the mirror reflecting the dim glow of the room, its surface streaked with age. Liam's eyes, wide and unblinking, stayed fixed on it, his lips moving as if trying to form words, though only a soft babble escaped. Caitlin paused, a spoon hovering over the pot, her heart giving a small, uneasy thud, but she shook it off, attributing it to his growing imagination. The way he'd recently taken to pointing at everything from the dog next door to the clouds. Outside, she returned to her task, stirring the oatmeal with a little more force than necessary, the steam rising in faint curls around her hands. Later, as she wiped Liam's face clean, she noticed him turn his head again, his gaze drawn back to the mirror, his tiny arm reaching out as if trying to touch something beyond the glass. A shiver ran down her spine, though she couldn't say why, the room suddenly feeling colder despite the heat from the stove. Nathan came home that evening, his boots heavy on the porch steps, his face etched with the fatigue of a 10-hour shift. Caitlin met him at the door, Liam balanced on her hip, and mentioned the odd moment from the morning, how Liam had fixated on the mirror, how it had unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. Nathan shed his jacket, hanging it on the rickety coat rack by the door, and stepped into the living room, his eyes flicking to the mirror as Caitlin recounted the scene. He ran a hand through his dark hair, still damp from the misty air outside, and let out a tired sigh, his shoulders slumping as he sank onto the couch. He dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand, his practical nature brushing aside the possibility of anything strange, suggesting Liam was just playing a game, the way kids often did with their reflections. Caitlin nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line, but the unease lingered, a quiet hum beneath her thoughts as she carried Liam upstairs to change him, the mirror's presence looming larger in her mind than it ever had before. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in bed beside Nathan, the quilt pulled tight around her shoulders, the room bathed in the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the curtains. The house settled around them, its usual chorus of creaks and groans filling the silence, but then came a sound that didn't belong: soft, deliberate footsteps echoing from the hallway beyond their door. Caitlin's eyes snapped open, her breath catching as she listened. The noise faint but unmistakable, a steady rhythm that moved past their room and toward the stairs. She sat up, her heart pounding, and nudged Nathan, who stirred with a groan, but didn't wake fully, his exhaustion keeping him tethered to sleep. Slipping out of bed, she padded to the door in her bare feet, the floor icy against her skin, and peered into the hallway, her hand gripping the knob as she squinted into the darkness. The corridor stretched empty before her, the shadows still, the air heavy with silence. She crept downstairs, her fingers brushing the wall for balance, and checked the living room, the kitchen, even Liam's room, but found nothing: no open windows, no signs of disturbance, just the house and its quiet. Mysteries. Back in bed, she pulled the covers higher, her mind racing despite her efforts to calm it. The footsteps replayed in her ears, too distinct to be the wind or the house's aging bones, and she couldn't shake the image of Liam pointing at the mirror, his small face so intent, so certain. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of her tired mind, but as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the mirror lingered in her thoughts, its cloudy surface a silent sentinel in the heart of their home, watching over a secret she couldn't yet name. The days following Liam's odd fixation on the mirror unfolded with an undercurrent of unease that Caitlin couldn't shake, the house in Boise settling into a rhythm that felt subtly off-kilter. Morning light filtered through the narrow windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the living room, where the antique mirror hung above the fireplace, its tarnished frame catching the glow in a way that seemed to draw the eye. Caitlin moved through her routine with a mechanical precision, her hands busy with the tasks of motherhood, wiping down the high chair after Liam's breakfast, stacking wooden blocks on the floor of his room, rinsing dishes in the sink while the radio hummed faintly in the background. But her attention kept drifting to Liam, who had begun to exhibit a pattern she couldn't ignore. He pointed at the mirror more frequently now, his small arms stretching toward it from wherever he sat, his wide eyes locked on the glass with a focus that seemed unnatural for a 2-year-old, his brow creasing as if puzzled by what he saw. She watched him closely, her heart giving a small jolt each time he turned toward the living room, his movements deliberate despite his toddler clumsiness. When she carried him past the mirror to change his diaper or fetch a toy, he twisted in her arms, his head craning to keep it in sight, his fingers grasping at the air as if trying to touch something just out of reach. Caitlin noticed other changes. Liam had stopped playing in the living room, a space he'd once loved for its open floor and the soft rug where he'd roll his toy cars. Now he lingered in his bedroom upstairs, a cramped nook with peeling blue paint and a single window, overlooking the backyard where no mirrors hung to catch his gaze. She set up his toys there instead, spreading a blanket on the floor and sitting with him as he stacked blocks or pushed a plastic train. But even then, his eyes darted toward the doorway as if sensing the mirror's presence down the hall. Nathan returned home each evening, his truck rumbling into the driveway as the sky darkened, the chill of March settling over Boise like a heavy blanket. Caitlin met him at the door, her apron dusted with flour from dinner preparations, Liam toddling behind her with a toy clutched in his hand. She mentioned Liam's behavior again, her voice tinged with a quiet urgency as she described how he avoided the living room, how his pointing had become a daily ritual. Nathan shed his coat, the fabric stiff with cold, and hung it on the rack, his movements slow as he processed her words. He stepped into the living room, his boots leaving faint traces of mud on the floor, and stood before the mirror, his reflection staring back at him in the cloudy glass. He tilted his head, his practical mind searching for an explanation, and suggested it was just a phase, a quirk of Liam's imagination sparked by the mirror's size or the way it distorted the room. Caitlin nodded, her hands twisting the edge of her apron, but the explanation felt flimsy, a bandage over a wound that refused to heal. That night, sleep came fitfully to both of them. Caitlin lay awake, her eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, the footsteps from the previous night echoing in her memory. Nathan slept beside her, his breathing deep and uneven, his body sprawled across the bed after another grueling shift at the mill. Around midnight, a sound pierced the silence, Liam's cries, sharp and insistent, rising from his room down the hall. Caitlin bolted upright, her heart racing as she slipped out of bed, her bare feet cold against the floorboards as she hurried to him. She found him sitting up in his crib, his small hands gripping the rails, his face crumpled with distress as he stared into the darkness beyond his door. She scooped him into her arms, his body trembling against hers, and rocked him gently, her hands smoothing his dark curls as she hummed a lullaby, her voice shaky but steadying. His cries softened, but his eyes remained fixed on the hallway, the path that led to the living room and the mirror beyond. Nathan stirred at the sound, his eyes bleary as he joined her in the nursery, his silhouette filling the doorway as he rubbed sleep from his face. He watched Liam for a moment, his brow furrowing as he noticed the boy's unwavering stare, the way his small body tensed even in Caitlin's embrace. He stepped into the hall, his socks muffling his steps, and peered toward the stairs, the house silent save for the faint creak of settling wood. He returned to Caitlin, his expression a mix of fatigue and doubt, and agreed to keep a closer eye on Liam, though he still clung to the belief that it was nothing more than a toddler's fancy. Caitlin nodded, her arms tightening around Liam as she carried him back to his crib, but the unease gnawed at her, a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. She checked the house again, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows as she moved from room to room, her steps slow and cautious. The living room felt colder than the rest, the air heavy around the mirror, its surface reflecting the dim light in a way that made her skin prickle. The next morning, Nathan lingered at home longer than usual, his shift starting later due to a maintenance delay at the mill. He sat on the couch with Liam on his lap, a picture book open between them, his deep voice narrating the story of a lost duckling as Liam's small hands turned the pages. Caitlin watched from the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, its steam curling into the air, but her relief was short-lived. Liam's attention drifted from the book, his head turning toward the mirror, his finger pointing once more, his expression darkening with a quiet intensity. Nathan followed his gaze, his narration faltering as he studied the mirror, its frame, looming larger in the room than it ever had before. He set the book aside, his hands resting on Liam's shoulders, and observed the boy for a long moment, his skepticism wavering as the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Caitlin joined them, her mug forgotten on the counter, and suggested they do anything to ease her growing fear. Nathan sighed, his practical nature bending under the weight of her concern, and proposed setting up a camera in the living room, a simple solution to either prove her wrong or uncover the truth. They drove to a local electronics store that afternoon. Liam strapped into his car seat and returned with a small camera equipped with night vision, its lens soon fixed on a shelf across from the mirror, its red light blinking as it began to record the night ahead. The first night with the camera in place settled over the house in Boise with a stillness that felt almost oppressive, the March air outside growing colder as dusk gave way to a starless sky. Caitlin tucked Liam into his crib upstairs, her hands lingering on his small form as she adjusted the blanket, the nursery bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. His dark curls framed his face, his breathing steadying into the rhythm of sleep, and she lingered by the door, her eyes darting toward the hallway, the path that led to the living room below. Nathan checked the camera before bed, its small black body perched on a shelf across from the mirror. Its lens trained on the antique glass, the red recording light a faint pulse in the dim room. He adjusted its angle slightly, ensuring it captured the full expanse of the mirror's surface, the cloudy reflection shimmering faintly under the glow of a single lamp left on for the night. The house creaked around them as they climbed into bed, the wind rattling the windows, but Caitlin found sleep elusive, her mind replaying Liam's pointed gestures, the footsteps she'd heard, the chill she couldn't explain. Morning arrived with a gray light filtering through the curtains, the snowmold outside dripping steadily from the eaves. Nathan rose early, his boots scuffing against the floor as he descended the stairs, his breath visible in the chilly air of the living room. He retrieved the camera, its battery still half full, and carried it to the kitchen, where Caitlin was already up, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, her hands unsteady from a restless night. Liam sat in his high chair, nibbling on a piece of toast, his small legs swinging as he watched his parents with curious eyes. Nathan plugged the camera into his laptop, a clunky device that hummed to life on the counter, and opened the footage, his fingers tapping impatiently as the file loaded. He intended to skim through it quickly to show Caitlin that nothing had happened, that the mirror was just an old piece of furniture and their son's behavior a harmless quirk. The screen flickered, revealing the living room in shades of green and black, the night vision casting an eerie glow over the familiar space, the mirror a looming presence at the center of the frame. He fast-forwarded through the early hours, the timestamp ticking past midnight, the room still and unchanged, the lamp's light steady against the darkness. But around 2:47 am, something caught his eye, a faint blur near the edge of the mirror, a distortion that didn't match the static surroundings. He paused the video, his brow furrowing as he rewound a few seconds, his finger hovering over the play button as he leaned closer to the screen. The blur sharpened into a shadow, a wispy shape that drifted across the glass, its edges undefined but unmistakably moving. Nathan's pulse quickened, his breath catching as he watched it linger for a moment before fading back into the mirror's depths. He replayed the segment, his eyes narrowing as he tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, a reflection from the window, a glitch in the camera's sensor, but the shadow's motion felt too deliberate, too alive, to dismiss so easily. He called Caitlin over, his hand gesturing to the laptop, his face pale as he pointed to the timestamp, the unease he'd brushed off now creeping into his chest. Caitlin set her mug down, the coffee sloshing slightly as she crossed the kitchen, her slippers silent on the linoleum. She stood beside Nathan, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and watched as he replayed the footage, the green-tinted image filling the screen. The shadow emerged again, its form more distinct this time, a silhouette that hinted at shoulders, a head, a figure too human to be a mere trick of optics. Her stomach twisted, a cold dread spreading through her as the shape hovered before the mirror, its edges rippling like smoke before it vanished, leaving the room empty once more. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd captured. Nathan scrubbed through the rest of the night, his fingers trembling slightly, but found no further movement, the footage returning to its static calm until dawn broke at 6:13 am. The lamp's glow fading into the morning light. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the laptop the only sound, Liam's soft babbling a distant echo from his high chair. Nathan rubbed his jaw, his practical mind wrestling with what he'd seen, and suggested it might be a defect in the camera, a lens flare from the lamp, anything to anchor the moment in reality. Caitlin shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the screen, the shadow's presence too vivid to explain away, its motion too purposeful to be a glitch. She felt a shiver run through her, the memory of Liam's pointing hand flashing in her mind, the way he'd stared at the mirror as if seeing something or someone beyond the glass. Nathan agreed to leave the camera running another night, his skepticism bending under the weight of the evidence, his hands unsteady as he reset the device and placed it back on the shelf, its lens once again trained on the mirror. The next night unfolded with a tension that hung over the house like a storm cloud, the wind outside picking up, rattling the old windows with a ferocity that made the walls groan. Caitlin checked on Liam before bed, her fingers brushing his curls as he slept, his small chest rising and falling under the blanket, the nursery a sanctuary from the unease downstairs. She joined Nathan in their room, the quilt pulled tight around her shoulders, her ears straining for any sound beyond the wind's howl. Sleep came in fragments, her dreams fractured by images of the mirror, its surface rippling like water. When morning broke, Nathan retrieved the camera again, his steps heavier as he carried it to the kitchen. Caitlin already waiting with a fresh pot of coffee, her face drawn from another sleepless night. He loaded the footage, his breath shallow as the screen lit up, and this time, the recording revealed more than a shadow dot at 3:22 am. The figure emerged again, its form clearer now, a tall silhouette with broad shoulders, its edges sharpening. As it stepped closer to the mirror, it moved with a slow, deliberate grace, crossing the frame as if drawn to the glass, its head turning slightly as if surveying the room. Caitlin's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide as she watched. The figure's presence undeniable, its outline too solid to be a trick of light. Nathan leaned forward, his jaw tight, his fingers gripping the laptop as the silhouette lingered, its form hovering before the mirror for nearly a minute before it dissolved, sinking back into the glass like ink into water. The room returned to stillness, the lamp's glow undisturbed, but the weight of what they'd seen settled over them, a revelation that turned their quiet home into something unfamiliar, something alive with a secret they couldn't yet grasp. Nights in the Boise house grew heavier with each recording, the camera's unblinking eye capturing a presence that defied explanation, its footage transforming the once familiar living room into a stage for something unseen. Caitlin and Nathan watched the videos each morning, their coffee cooling untouched on the kitchen counter, their faces drawn with a mix of exhaustion and dread as the figure appeared more frequently, its movements growing bolder. The silhouette, now a regular visitor, emerged from the mirror's depths at unpredictable hours, its form sharpening with each appearance, its edges no longer blurred but defined a tall shape with broad shoulders, its posture rigid as if standing at attention. One night, the camera caught it turning toward the lens, its head tilting slightly, the motion slow and deliberate, as if it had sensed the device watching it. The screen showed no face, just a void where features should have been, but the gesture sent a chill through Caitlin, her hands trembling as she clutched her mug, the coffee sloshing against the rim. Sleep became a distant memory for Caitlin, her nights spent tossing beneath the quilt, her ears straining for sounds beyond the wind that howled outside, rattling the windows with a ferocity that matched her growing fear. She woke often, her eyes darting to the doorway, half expecting to see the figure standing there, its shadowy form looming in the hall. Liam's behavior worsened during the day, his small body tense as he refused to leave his room, his toys abandoned in favor of clinging to Caitlin's side, his wide eyes scanning the house as if searching for something he couldn't name. He whimpered when she carried him downstairs, his arms tightening around her neck as they passed the living room, the mirror's presence a silent threat that seemed to press against him. Caitlin rearranged their routine, keeping him upstairs as much as possible, the nursery becoming their refuge, its peeling blue walls and single window a shield against the unease that permeated the lower floor. Nathan felt the strain too, though he fought to maintain a veneer of calm, his practical nature buckling under the weight of what the camera revealed. He returned from the lumber mill each evening, his hands rough from handling timber, his shoulders slumped from more than just physical fatigue. He noticed cold spots in the house now, patches of air that chilled his skin as he moved through the rooms, the temperature dropping inexplicably near the mirror. One night, he woke with a start, his heart pounding as he felt a presence at the foot of the bed, a weight that pressed against the mattress. Though the room was empty when he sat up, his breath visible in the dim light. He rubbed his eyes, his mind scrambling for a rational explanation. Stress, a dream. The house's quirks, but the sensation lingered. A shadow on his thoughts as he lay back down, his arm draped protectively over Caitlin, who slept fitfully beside him. Desperate for answers, Caitlin suggested they dig into the house's history, her voice shaky as she proposed it over breakfast, Liam pushing a toy car across the kitchen floor, his small hands unsteady. Nathan agreed, his skepticism eroded by the footage, and they drove to the Boise Public Library that afternoon. Liam strapped into his car seat, the gray sky overhead threatening snow. They met with a local historian, a wiry man in his 60s named Harold, who worked in the archives, his desk cluttered with yellowed papers and faded maps. He listened as Caitlin described the mirror, the figure, the cold that seemed to emanate from it, her hands twisting in her lap as she spoke. Harold adjusted his glasses, his fingers tracing the edge of a ledger, and recalled a story from the 1940s, a man named Edward, a reclusive tenant who had lived in their house, his death shrouded in mystery after neighbors reported strange noises and flickering lights. Edward had been found lifeless in the living room, the mirror beside him, his passing attributed to a heart attack, though whispers of something darker persisted in the town's memory. Caitlin's pulse quickened as Harold spoke, her mind latching onto the connection. The mirror had come with the house, its cracked frame and cloudy glass a relic of its past, possibly Edward's past. She envisioned him standing before it, his life tied to its surface in ways she couldn't fathom, and the thought sent a shiver down her spine. Nathan listened, his arms crossed, his jaw tight as he absorbed the tale, his practical side resisting the implications but unable to dismiss them entirely. They thanked Harold, his parting words a caution about old houses holding on to their stories, and returned home, the car silent except for Liam's soft humming in the back seat. Caitlin suggested removing the mirror, her hands gesturing toward the living room as they stepped inside, the air colder than it should have been. She argued it might stop whatever was happening, her voice rising with a desperate edge, but Nathan hesitated, his hand resting on the banister as he considered the idea. He wanted more proof, his need to understand outweighing his fear, and insisted they keep the camera running, his fingers brushing the device as he checked its battery, its lens still fixed on the mirror. The decision weighed on Caitlin as night fell, the house settling into a quiet that felt charged with anticipation, the wind outside dying down to a faint whisper. She moved through the rooms with a flashlight, her steps cautious as she checked locks and windows, her breath hitching each time she passed the living room, the mirror's reflection catching the beam in a way that made it shimmer. She climbed into bed beside Nathan, the quilt heavy over her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as she listened to the house, its creaks and groans now a chorus she couldn't ignore. Liam slept upstairs, his nursery a small island of calm, but Caitlin's mind raced, the historian's story intertwining with the footage, the figure's movements replaying in her thoughts. Nathan lay beside her, his breathing uneven, his hand resting on hers, a silent reassurance that felt fragile against the growing nightmare. The camera whirred softly downstairs, its red light a steady pulse in the darkness, recording a presence that seemed to grow stronger, its intentions unclear, but its grip on their home tightening with each passing night. The tension in the Boise house reached a breaking point as the night stretched on, the camera's recordings growing more disturbing, the figure's presence no longer a fleeting shadow but a palpable force that seemed to seep into every corner. Caitlin moved through the days in a haze, her eyes ringed with dark circles, her hands trembling as she fed Liam his meals, his small body clinging to her more tightly than ever. Nathan returned from the lumber mill each evening, his face etched with exhaustion, his attempts to rationalize the footage faltering as the evidence mounted, the mirror's hold on their lives tightening like a noose. The air in the house grew colder, the draft sharper, the creaks louder, and Liam's reluctance to leave his room turned into outright refusal, his small feet planted firmly at the top of the stairs, his cries piercing the silence whenever Caitlin tried to coax him down. The living room, once a place of warmth, became a forbidden zone, the mirror's cloudy surface a silent sentinel that seemed to watch them all. One night the camera captured the culmination of their fears, its lens bearing witness to a scene that shattered any remaining doubt. Darkness had fallen over Boise, the sky outside a heavy blanket of clouds, the wind reduced to a faint rustle. Against the windows, Caitlin tucked Liam into his crib, her fingers lingering on his blanket, the nursery's nightlight casting a soft glow over his sleeping form, his dark curls damp with sweat from a restless nap. She lingered by his side, her breath shallow as she listened to the house, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the heater downstairs. Nathan checked the camera before bed, its battery fully charged, its position unchanged on the shelf, the mirror framed perfectly in its view. He climbed into bed beside Caitlin, the quilt pulled tight around them, their hands brushing briefly in the dark. A fleeting moment of comfort before sleep claimed them. Though Caitlin's rest was shallow, her dreams haunted by the figures. Faceless stare dot at 2:14 a.m. The house jolted awake with Liam's scream, a raw, terrified sound that cut through the stillness, echoing down the hall. Caitlin bolted upright, her heart pounding as she threw off the quilt, her bare feet hitting the cold floor as she raced to the nursery, Nathan stumbling behind her, his groggy mind struggling to catch up. She burst into Liam's room, the nightlight flickering faintly, and found him standing in his crib, his small hands gripping the rails, his face contorted with fear as he pointed toward the doorway. Caitlin followed his gaze, her breath catching as she saw a shadow retreat into the hallway. Its form tall and broad, its edges sharp against the dim light filtering from downstairs. She scooped Liam into her arms, his body trembling against hers, his cries muffled as he buried his face in her shoulder, his tiny fingers still pointing toward the now empty space where the figure had stood. Nathan reached the doorway, his hand fumbling for the light switch, the bulb overhead casting a harsh glow over the hall. He stepped forward, his socks silent on the carpet, and peered toward the stairs, the air growing colder as he approached the living room below. Caitlin followed, Liam clutched tightly to her chest, her slipper scuffing against the floor as she descended, her eyes darting to the mirror, its surface shimmering faintly in the lamplight. Nathan grabbed the camera from its perch, his hands unsteady as he rewound the footage, the small screen lighting up with the night's events. The timestamp showed 2:12 a.m., and the figure emerged from the mirror, its form clearer than ever. Man in old-fashioned clothing, a long coat and wide-brimmed hat, its movements slow but purposeful as it stepped into the room, its boots leaving no mark on the rug. It crossed the floor, its silhouette stark against the green-tinted night vision, and moved toward the hallway, its head turning slightly as it ascended the stairs, its path leading straight to Liam's room. Caitlin's knees weakened as she watched, her grip on Liam tightening, his small body still shaking in her arms. The figure paused at the nursery door, its hand pale and skeletal reaching for the knob, the motion frozen for a heartbeat before it withdrew, the shadow retreating back down the hall and dissolving into the mirror, its form melting into the glass like smoke. Nathan's breath hitched, his fingers gripping the camera so hard the plastic creaked, his eyes wide as he replayed the moment. the reality of what they'd seen sinking in. Caitlin felt a wave of nausea, her mind racing with Harold's story. Of Edward, the man tied to the house's past, his death now a living nightmare that had reached for their son. She stumbled back, her shoulder brushing the wall, her heart pounding as she realized the mirror wasn't just a window, it was a door, and something had crossed through it. Panic seized them both, the footage a spark that ignited their fear into action. Nathan set the camera down, his hands shaking as he crossed the living room, his eyes fixed on the mirror, its cracked frame looming larger than ever. Caitlin carried Liam upstairs, her steps frantic as she grabbed the blanket from his crib, wrapping it around him as she returned to Nathan's side, her breath ragged with desperation. He pulled a hammer from a drawer in the kitchen, its handle worn from years of use, and marched to the garage, the mirror's removal now an urgent necessity. Caitlin followed, Liam cradled against her, her slippers crunching on the gravel-strewn floor as they entered the cold, dimly lit space, the air thick with the scent of oil and dust. Nathan tore the mirror from the wall, its weight heavy in his arms, and carried it to the garage, his muscles straining as he set it against the concrete.